It all started innocently enough, or so I thought. Sarah, my wife of 8 years, had been acting distant for a while, but I brushed it off as stress. She had taken on a lot of responsibilities at work recently, and I figured it was just that, a busy phase. We all have them, right? Her smiles were a bit more forced, her laughter quieter, but I kept telling myself that things would get back to normal soon. Maybe we just needed a weekend away or a nice long talk to reconnect. I didn't realize how wrong I was. It was a Saturday morning, and I was making coffee in the kitchen while Sarah was upstairs getting ready for another one of her brunches. She had started going to these get-togethers with her friends more frequently, and though it wasn't unlike her to be social, something about it made me uneasy. She used to invite me along, but for the last few months, she'd insist it was just a girls' thing. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, who doesn't need time with their friends? But recently, the patterns had shifted. She had become secretive, like when I'd walk into the room she'd quickly close her phone, her eyes flicking away from mine like she had something to hide. That morning was no different. She came down the stairs, her phone in her hand, and I noticed that same guarded look on her face. I asked, casually, "Where are you headed today?" "Just brunch with the usual girls." "Don't wait up, we might be out for a while," she said, her voice airy but detached. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're really into these brunches lately," I joked, trying to keep the tone light. "Yeah," she said, a bit too quickly, before glancing at her phone again. "It's good to catch up with everyone." I didn't push it. I watched her leave, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, and that same gut feeling gnawed at me. Something was off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The day went by slowly. I tried to distract myself, but I kept thinking about Sarah, about the way she'd been acting lately. My mind wandered to the nights she'd come home later than expected, brushing off her tardiness with a vague excuse about losing track of time. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right under my nose. Something I wasn't seeing clearly. That evening, she still hadn't returned. It was nearing midnight, and I was sitting in the living room when I got a text from my sister, Emily. The message seemed normal, she just asked if I was free for a quick call, but something about it felt strange, like there was something she wasn't telling me. Emily and I were close, but recently, she had been distant too. I figured it was just life getting in the way, but now I wondered if there was more to it. I called her back. "Hey, Emily, what's up?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in my own voice. "Nothing much," she said, her tone a little too light. "Just wanted to check in." We chatted for a few minutes, but the conversation was stilted. Emily sounded distracted, like she was holding something back. After we hung up, that nagging feeling returned, stronger this time. I glanced at the clock, it was almost 1 a.m., and Sarah still wasn't home. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted her. "Hey, everything okay? It's getting late." No response. An hour later, I tried again. Still nothing. My mind started spinning with possibilities. What if something had happened? What if she was hurt? But beneath those thoughts was a darker one, the fear that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't where she said she was. I went to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, my thoughts churning, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Sarah had never given me a reason to doubt her before. This was just my imagination running wild, fueled by a few too many sleepless nights and the subtle changes in her behavior. The next morning, she came home around 7 a.m., slipping quietly through the front door like she didn't want to wake me. But I was already awake. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floors and the soft creak of the door as she entered the bedroom. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep, though my heart raced in my chest. She slipped into bed beside me, her movements careful, like she was trying not to disturb me. Her perfume lingered in the air, mixed with a scent I didn't recognize, something sharp, unfamiliar. "Hey," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. I'm sorry I got back so late." I mumbled something incoherent, keeping my voice low to mask the suspicion bubbling inside me. She seemed relieved that I didn't press for details, and within minutes, she was asleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Where had she been all night? And why hadn't she answered my texts? I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was going on in her life that I wasn't a part of. It wasn't until a few days later that I noticed something odd. Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and a message popped up on the screen. I glanced at it, just a reflex, really, but what I saw made my stomach drop. It was a text from Emily. "Can't wait to see you later," it read. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Emily and Sarah had become good friends over the years, so it wasn't unusual for them to make plans. But something about the wording, something about the secrecy, struck me as strange. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. And that's when I realized the truth had been staring me in the face all along. That morning, after Sarah slipped back into bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with too many questions and too few answers. I lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what was going on. Emily's text from the other night still nagged at me, though I tried to convince myself it was nothing. They were sisters-in-law, after all. They spent time together. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, making something out of nothing. But doubt had already planted itself, and it was spreading like wildfire. By mid-morning, Sarah was still asleep, and I needed to get out of the house. I grabbed my keys and left without a word, telling myself I just needed to clear my head, take a drive, and maybe things would feel less wrong. The town was quiet, like it always was on a Sunday, and I welcomed the calm. I drove aimlessly, trying to push aside the unease that had settled in my gut. As I made my way through the streets, I passed by the little cafe downtown, the one Sarah and I used to frequent when we first got married. It was one of those spots that held so many memories, back when things were simple, before everything started to feel so distant. I barely glanced at it at first, just another landmark on my route, but something caught my eye in the window, a flash of familiarity. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. It was Sarah. She was sitting at one of the small, round tables near the window, and she wasn't alone. Emily was with her, leaning in close. I felt a brief flicker of relief, seeing them together, laughing, like nothing was wrong. But then I saw it. At first, I thought I must have imagined it, a trick of the light, maybe, or just an innocent gesture. But no. There was no mistaking what I had just seen. Sarah and Emily leaned in closer, their faces inches apart, and then they kissed. Not a quick peck on the cheek. No, this was different, intimate, lingering. I slammed on the brakes, my car jerking to a stop in the middle of the street. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat there, frozen, watching them through the glass. They didn't notice me, completely absorbed in each other. They were smiling, laughing, like they didn't have a care in the world. Like this was normal. Like I didn't exist. I felt the air leave my lungs in a slow, painful exhale. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, and my mind spun with disbelief. I blinked, hoping I had seen it wrong. But no matter how many times I replayed the image in my head, the truth was undeniable. Sarah, my wife, was kissing Emily, my sister. For a few moments, I just sat there, my mind unable to process what I had just witnessed. I felt sick, my stomach turning as the realization sunk in. My wife wasn't just distant. She wasn't just hiding something. She was hiding this. I didn't know what to do. Should I burst in there? Confront them? Scream at them for betraying me in the most unimaginable way? My heart was beating so fast, it felt like it might explode. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me, but I couldn't. How could I? The two people I trusted most were sitting right there, wrapped up in a secret that had shattered everything I thought I knew. Suddenly, I felt like a fool. All the late-night brunches, the vague explanations, the distant looks, I had been blind to it all. I had chalked up Sarah's behavior to work stress or boredom, thinking we'd figure it out like we always did. But now it was clear. This wasn't just some rough patch in our marriage. This was something else entirely, something I never could have imagined. Before I knew what I was doing, I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, speeding away from the cafe, my mind swirling with anger, hurt, and confusion. I couldn't be there, couldn't watch them act so carefree while my life unraveled. How long had this been going on? How long had I been the fool, oblivious to what was happening right under my nose? The streets blurred as I drove through town, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. The image of Sarah and Emily together, laughing, kissing, it wouldn't leave my mind. I could feel the rage building inside me, threatening to spill over, but I had no outlet for it. I couldn't storm into that cafe and confront them, not like this. I needed to think, to understand what had just happened. But how could I? The woman I loved, the woman I'd married and built a life with, was cheating on me, with my sister. I pulled into an empty parking lot at the edge of town and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was crumbling around me, and I had no idea what to do next. How was I supposed to move forward from this? There were so many questions, but I had no answers. The only thing I knew for sure was that my life would never be the same again. And I had no idea how to face it. I drove around for what felt like hours, trying to wrap my head around what I had just seen. Sarah and Emily. Together. Kissing. Every possible explanation spun through my mind, but none of them made sense. How long had this been going on? What was this? Was it real, or was it some bizarre mistake? I had to talk to them. Confront them. But the truth, the real truth, was already hanging over me like a weight I couldn't escape. By the time I pulled back into the driveway, the house was quiet. I knew Sarah was inside, probably sitting on the couch like nothing had happened. I still wasn't sure what I was going to say or do, but I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I stepped through the front door, my chest tight with anger and disbelief. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, and I could hear her moving around in the kitchen, humming softly like she hadn't just spent her morning kissing someone else, let alone my sister. Sarah. I called, trying to keep my voice steady. She appeared in the doorway, smiling, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Hey, babe," she said, her tone cheerful, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I stared at her, my mind racing. For a split second, I considered playing it cool, pretending I hadn't seen anything, maybe even wait until I had all the facts. But then, the image of her and Emily together flashed through my mind again, and I felt the anger bubbling up. "I saw you," I blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I drove by the cafe this morning," I said, my voice hard. "I saw you with Emily. Kissing." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, blinking at me. Then, she let out a small laugh, a nervous, uncertain sound. "What?" "Jack, no, you must be mistaken." "I'm not mistaken," I said, my fists clenching at my sides. "I saw you, Sarah. Both of you. At the cafe." She stared at me, her eyes widening, but not in the way I expected. There was no guilt, no apology. Instead, she looked confused. "Jack, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't at the cafe with Emily today." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. Was she really going to stand there and lie to my face? After everything I had just seen? "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I know what I saw." "I'm not lying," she insisted, stepping closer to me, her voice tinged with frustration now. "Jack, I was out with the girls today, like I told you. I wasn't with Emily." "You expect me to believe that?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. I saw you too. I saw it. She reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away, too furious to let her calm me down with her usual soft words. Jack, please. You've got it wrong. I don't know what you think you saw, but it wasn't us. I couldn't believe it. How could she stand there and lie so easily? My mind was racing, and all I could think about was how she was trying to cover her tracks. Then why didn't you answer my texts last night? Why didn't you call me? You come home at 7 in the morning, and now you're telling me nothing happened? I told you, it was a late night with the girls. I didn't realize it was so late, and I didn't want to wake you. I stood there, staring at her, feeling the walls closing in around me. Her calm, composed demeanor only fueled my anger. She wasn't going to admit it. Not now, not ever. Where's Emily? I demanded. I'm talking to her too. She's at her place, I think, Sarah said, looking confused. Why do you want to drag her into this? Jack, this is crazy. I didn't care what she thought. I grabbed my phone, stormed out the door, and drove straight to Emily's. When I knocked on her door, she opened it, looking surprised and more than a little anxious. Jack? What's going on? You know what's going on, I said, pushing past her into the house. I saw you. You and Sarah. Emily's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then, like Sarah, she quickly recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen Sarah today. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. They were both lying. My own wife and my own sister, standing there, denying everything like I was some fool. The fury boiling inside me was almost too much to contain. I saw you, I said again, my voice low, barely controlled. At the cafe. I saw you kiss. Emily shook her head, her expression perfectly composed. Jack, you've got it wrong. You must have seen someone else. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out, leaving Emily standing there in the doorway, and sped home. My mind was racing, trying to understand how both of them could lie so easily, so calmly. I needed proof. I needed something that would show them I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't some paranoid husband. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I stayed up, thinking. If they were going to lie to me like this, I had to find another way to get the truth. I couldn't confront them again without something concrete. I didn't want to be the guy who snooped, but they had left me no choice. The next day, I bought a set of small surveillance cameras. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep an eye on the house when I wasn't around. I felt sick doing it, but I needed answers. If Sarah and Emily were really sneaking around behind my back, I had to know. I couldn't live in the dark anymore, wondering if every word out of their mouths was a lie. I spent the afternoon setting up the cameras, one in the living room, one near the front door, another in the bedroom. I didn't tell Sarah, of course. She would never agree to it. This was for me, to protect myself, to see what was really happening when I wasn't around. As I finished, a knot of guilt tightened in my stomach. This wasn't who I was. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who spied on his wife. But they had forced my hand. If they were going to keep lying, I had to be smart. I had to be one step ahead. The cameras were live now, feeding directly to my phone. All I had to do was wait. And I would. Because I wasn't letting this go until I had the truth. The cameras were in place, silently recording the truth I was so desperate to uncover. Every time I glanced at my phone, the feed stared back at me, empty and quiet. There was no sign of anything suspicious at first, but then again, I wasn't expecting it to happen right away. Sarah was careful, too careful. But sooner or later, they'd slip up. That night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. She seemed so calm, so unaffected by everything. It was like the confrontation earlier in the day hadn't rattled her at all. I, on the other hand, could barely close my eyes. The weight of what I'd seen, and the lies that followed, pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. My mind replayed the scene at the cafe over and over. The way they kissed, so natural, so familiar. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing. This had been happening for a while. It was too practiced, too comfortable. And now, Sarah was lying here next to me like nothing had changed, while I lay in the dark, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I didn't confront her again that night. I was too tired, too numb to deal with it. But I knew I had to bide my time, wait for the proof I needed. The cameras would do the job for me. I just needed to be patient. The next few days were tense, to say the least. I could barely look at Sarah without feeling a wave of anger and hurt rise up inside me. But I kept it together. I played along, pretending that everything was fine. I didn't want her to know what I was up to, didn't want her to suspect that I was watching her every move. I wanted her to slip up. And she did. It started on Thursday afternoon. I was at work when I got a notification on my phone from the living room camera. Sarah was home early, which wasn't too unusual. She worked part-time, so her schedule was flexible. But something about the notification made my heart race. I opened the app and watched as she walked into the house, her phone pressed to her ear, a smile on her face. She seemed nervous, excited, even. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see it in her body language. Whoever she was talking to, it wasn't just a casual chat. She paced around the living room, glancing at the front door every few seconds, like she was waiting for someone. I watched, my hands gripping the phone tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, after a few minutes, the doorbell rang. It was Emily. I watched in disbelief as Sarah rushed to the door, her face lighting up when she saw her. They hugged, longer than sisters-in-law usually do. And then they kissed. Right there, in the middle of our living room, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt sick, my stomach twisting in knots as I stared at the screen. This was it. This was the proof I needed. They were lying to me. Both of them. But it wasn't over. They didn't just stop at the kiss. They sat down on the couch together, laughing and talking, like they were in some kind of secret relationship. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. The way they looked at each other said it all. I sat there in my office, my mind spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I confront them right now? Should I rush home and catch them in the act? Or should I wait, gather more evidence before I made my move? I didn't know what to do. My mind was clouded with anger, hurt, and confusion. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore this anymore. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was real. My wife was having an affair with my sister. I watched the feed for a few more minutes, trying to make sense of the situation. They were so comfortable together, so familiar. It was like they had been doing this for months, maybe even years, right under my nose. After about an hour, they left the house, and I watched as they drove off together, still smiling, still laughing. I had no idea where they were going, but I didn't care. All I knew was that my marriage, my life, was built on a lie. I sat there, staring at the now empty living room, the silence in the office pressing in on me. The truth had finally hit me, and there was no going back. When I got home that evening, Sarah was already back, acting as though nothing had happened. She greeted me with a smile, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day like she always did. I couldn't bring myself to respond the way I normally would. I just muttered something about work being busy and headed upstairs to the bedroom. I needed to be alone. I needed to think. The next few days passed in a blur. I continued watching the cameras, hoping for more evidence, more confirmation of what I already knew. Every time Emily came over, it was the same thing. They'd kiss, talk, and act like they were in some secret relationship, all while pretending nothing was wrong. I had seen enough. On Friday night, I decided it was time to confront Sarah. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine while my wife was lying to my face every day. After dinner, when the house was quiet and the kids were in bed, I sat down in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was in the kitchen, washing dishes, completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Sarah," I called out, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah?" "Sit down," I said, nodding toward the couch. She frowned, clearly sensing that something was off. But she didn't argue. She walked over and sat down across from me, her eyes searching my face for clues. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice hesitant. I didn't answer right away. I took a deep breath, gathering the strength I needed to say what had to be said. "I know," I said finally, my voice low but firm. She blinked, confusion crossing her face. "Know what?" "I know about you and Emily," I said, staring straight into her eyes. Her face went pale, and for the first time, she couldn't hide the guilt in her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I leaned forward, my voice hard as steel. "I've seen it all, Sarah. The lies. The kisses. Everything." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, trying to find the right words. But there were no words that could fix this. "Don't bother lying again," I added, my voice cracking slightly with the weight of it all. "I have cameras set up. I've seen everything." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I saw fear flash across her face. She knew the game was up. Sarah's face turned pale as I told her about the cameras. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she was going to say something, but she didn't. Her eyes darted around the room, avoiding mine, searching for an escape. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to respond. This was it, the moment of truth. There was no more hiding. No more lies. I had her cornered, and she knew it. For a few seconds, she said nothing, and then suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. Her face twisted into a mask of panic, and without warning, she stood up, her voice rising as she threw her hands in the air. "You set up cameras?" "Cameras?" she shrieked, pacing back and forth in front of me. "That's insane, Jack. You can't spy on me like that. What the hell is wrong with you?" I stayed calm, my eyes never leaving her. I knew this was coming. She wasn't going to admit it without a fight. "What's wrong with me?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You've been lying to me for months. Kissing my sister. Sneaking around behind my back, and now you're trying to turn this on me? I'm the problem?" She stopped pacing and whirled around to face me, her face flushed with anger. "This is insane, you can't just record people like that. That's an invasion of privacy." "Privacy?" I shot back. "You're talking to me about privacy after everything you've done? Don't act like you're the victim here, Sarah. You've been betraying me, lying to me, and with my sister, no less." Sarah's eyes flickered with something, a mix of guilt and panic, but she wasn't done yet. Instead of calming down, she went into full meltdown mode. She started throwing her arms around, pacing faster, her voice climbing higher with every word. "You have no right. No right to spy on me like that. You've gone too far, Jack. Way too far." She was practically yelling now, her voice shaky, but I stayed quiet, letting her tantrum play out. This wasn't about the cameras. It was about the fact that I had caught her. She was trying to shift the blame, hoping I'd back down. But I wasn't going to. "Don't try to turn this around," I said, my voice firm. "I know what I saw, Sarah. I saw you and Emily kissing. It's over." Her face contorted, and for a moment, I thought she was going to deny it again, but instead, she did something I hadn't expected. She dropped to her knees in front of me, tears welling up in her eyes, her hands clutching at my arm. "Jack," she sobbed, her voice breaking. Please don't do this. Don't show anyone that video. You can't show anyone. Please." I stared at her, my stomach churning. Her sudden shift from anger to desperation caught me off guard, and for a brief moment, I hesitated. She was pleading now, her eyes wide with panic, her fingers digging into my arm as if she could physically stop me from going any further. "I'm begging you, Jack," she cried, her voice trembling. "Please don't show anyone. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I'll stop seeing Emily. I'll end it. Just don't tell anyone. Don't ruin her life. Please." "Ruin her life?" I asked, my voice low, barely holding back the storm of emotions that had been swirling inside me for days. "What about my life, Sarah? What about everything you've ruined?" She sobbed harder, her head dropping as she knelt in front of me, her fingers still clutching at my arm like she was hanging on for dear life. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't mean for it to happen at all, but please, Jack. I'll leave her. I'll leave Emily. Just don't tell anyone about the video. Don't show it to anyone. It'll destroy her." I stood up, pulling my arm away from her grasp. "And what about me? What about us? You think you can just end it with Emily, and that'll fix everything?" "I will," she cried, scrambling to her feet, still frantic. "I'll end it. I swear. You have to believe me, Jack. I'll leave her. It was a mistake. I was confused, and I didn't know what I was doing. But please don't show the video. You can't do that to her." I stared at her, my heart heavy with anger and disbelief. She was still trying to protect Emily, even now. Even after everything she had done to me, she was more concerned about saving Emily's reputation than about fixing the mess she had made of our marriage. "You should have thought about that before you did it," I said quietly, my voice laced with bitterness. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Jack, please. I'll leave her. I'll end it right now. I'll call her, and it'll be over. But you can't tell anyone. You can't show anyone the video. You have to promise me." She was practically hysterical now, her voice cracking with every word. I had never seen her like this, so desperate, so terrified. It was as if the thought of that video being exposed was worse than losing me. "I don't owe you any promises," I said coldly. "Jack, please," she cried again, reaching for me, but I took a step back, my eyes locked on hers. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. Her face crumpled, and she collapsed back onto the couch, sobbing into her hands, her body shaking with the weight of her guilt. I stood there for a moment, watching her fall apart, feeling the coldness settle over me. It didn't matter that she was promising to leave Emily. It didn't matter that she was begging me not to expose the video. The damage had already been done. She had shattered everything we had built, and no amount of pleading could change that. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind, still crying, still broken. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't letting her off that easy. Not after what she had done. Not after the lies, the betrayal, and the months of deception. She wasn't going to manipulate me anymore. And I wasn't going to forget. The days that followed Sarah's breakdown were some of the longest of my life. She had promised to end things with Emily, begged me not to expose the video, and swore that she'd do whatever it took to fix our marriage. But I wasn't stupid. I knew that promises made out of desperation were usually empty. And even if she meant it in the moment, something told me that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I tried to carry on like normal. Went to work, came home, tried to focus on anything other than what had happened. But the thought of Sarah and Emily, the lies, the betrayal, it consumed me. Every time I looked at Sarah, every time she smiled or touched me, I couldn't stop thinking about the two of them together. The image of them kissing, laughing, acting like they didn't have a care in the world, was burned into my mind. And worse than that, there was something else. I didn't trust her. Even with her tearful promises and vows to leave Emily, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So I kept watching. The cameras were still in place, and I checked them every day, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she really had ended things. But deep down, I knew the truth. It was a Tuesday night when I found out. Sarah had been acting distant again, but this time she was more guarded, like she was trying harder to hide it. She spent more time upstairs, and every time I walked into the room, she'd put her phone away or pretend she wasn't doing anything. It was subtle, but I could feel it. That same nervous energy I'd seen before, the same secrecy. She thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was. That evening, while she was supposedly taking a bath, I got another notification from the cameras. This time, it was from the bedroom. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should even check. Part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to confirm what I was already suspecting. But I opened the feed anyway. And there it was. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in her hand, staring at the screen with a look I knew all too well. She was texting, her fingers flying across the screen, her face lit up with the kind of smile she hadn't shown me in months. My heart sank as I watched her, my stomach churning with dread. I knew who she was texting. Emily. I switched to another camera, the one in the living room, and there it was again. Emily, standing at the front door. They'd planned this. Sarah hadn't even told me she was coming over. They were being careful, trying to keep it from me. But I was already on to them. I watched as Sarah hurried downstairs, her face flushed with excitement. She opened the door, and Emily stepped inside, her eyes locking onto Sarah's. They didn't even bother with small talk this time. Within seconds, they were wrapped up in each other, kissing just like they had before, their bodies pressed together like they couldn't stand to be apart. I felt the familiar wave of nausea rise up in my throat. It was happening again. After everything Sarah had promised, after everything she had begged for, she was still seeing Emily. Still lying. And this time, it wasn't just some kiss. They were taking it further. I kept watching, though every second felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Sarah led Emily upstairs, and I could hear the muffled sounds of their voices, soft laughter, the creak of the bed as they collapsed onto it. I didn't need to hear what they were saying to know what was happening. They were having sex. In our bed. Again. I should have felt something, rage, heartbreak, maybe even shock, but instead, I felt nothing. I was numb. The reality of it all had finally settled in, and I couldn't fight it anymore. This wasn't just an affair. Sarah loved her. She had chosen her. No matter what she said, no matter how many times she promised to leave Emily, she couldn't. And she wouldn't. I sat there, staring at the screen, watching the woman I had built a life with betray me in the worst possible way. Again. I didn't need to see any more. I already knew what I had to do. That night, while Sarah and Emily were still upstairs, I packed a bag. I didn't want to stay there another second, not in a house filled with lies and betrayal. Every corner of that place was tainted now, every memory twisted and broken by what she had done. I left the cameras running, though. I wanted them to know I knew. I wanted Sarah to realize that no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the truth was always going to come out. And when she woke up the next morning, she'd see that I was gone. The door clicked shut behind me as I stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I stood there for a moment, staring at the house, feeling the weight of everything settle on my shoulders. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of a life I had built, a life I thought was real. But it wasn't. As I drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me in that house. Nothing but broken promises, shattered trust, and a woman who had chosen someone else. A few days later, I got a text from Sarah. It was short, desperate. "Please, Jack. Come back. I can explain. I'm sorry." I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. No explanation, no apology could fix what she had done. Sarah had made her choice. And I had made mine. I left her, and this time, it was for good.